What if we could? Have you ever whispered a question to yourself? Not because it's silly, but because it feels too big to say out loud. What if we could build a society without harm? Now, I asked that question of myself during a meditation retreat, right before violence came crashing at our door. And weeks later, the US launched a strike on Iran. And once again, I found myself asking, is this just the way the world works? Or is something else possible? Put me in that camp. So, in this episode of Terrified Nation, I explore what it takes to build a world that is rooted in care, not control, that is rooted in restoration, not retaliation. If you are tired of feeling powerless, if you still believe in the courage of compassion, this one is for you. Listen now at terrifiednation.com or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
If you've ever felt fear, doubt, or despair about the future of our country, you're not alone. Terrified Nation is a podcast for those ready to face hard truths with open hearts. Hosted by Debilyn Molineaux, each episode explores how we can move beyond division and build a society rooted in care, courage, and connection. If this resonates with you, hit follow and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Now here's your host, Debilyn Molineaux.
Welcome back to Terrified Nation. I'm your host, Debilyn Molineaux. And this show is about facing the big emotions that shape our lives today: fear, anger, and despair. And we're learning how to move through them towards something that's more grounded, more connected, and more hopeful. We don't pretend that things are fine when they're not. We ask honest questions, and we sit with discomfort, and we imagine what else might be possible. So when I feel scared or overwhelmed, which is often these days, I ask myself this question: what if we could build a society without harm? Usually I whisper this question. It's as if saying it out loud might invite scorn, because it's easy to laugh at. It's easy to dismiss. And I've dismissed it myself, especially on hard days when the news is just relentless and cruelty seems to be winning. But still, this question returns over and over again. It tugs at something deep inside me, a longing that I suspect many of us share. And sometimes the violence that we try to keep at bay finds its way in. It breaches the quiet places, the sacred spaces, the sanctuaries where we go to heal. And a few weeks ago, I was in Boulder, Colorado for a meditation retreat. I was preparing to take the Bodhisattva vow. It's a lifelong commitment to bring compassion and alleviate suffering. And it was meant to be a space of deep care and quiet renewal. But during our lunch break on day 2, we were interrupted by a violent altercation just outside the retreat center. And at first it looked like street theater, these 2 older white men yelling at each other with violent words across the plaza in front of the courthouse. And something felt off. And a young boy wearing a yarmulke approached us asking for bandages, and he was strangely calm. And moments later, we learned that the assailant had used firebombs and a makeshift flamethrower to attack a gathering of Jewish people. At least a dozen people were injured, and the attacker himself was taken into custody. And the violence was shocking in its method and deeply unsettling in its timing. And the world that we were trying to heal from came crashing through the retreat door, obviously. And in the days that followed, I stayed quiet. I returned to the retreat and to my breath and my compassion. But the truth is, I was rattled. I still am. And then a few weeks later, the global stage echoed this violence when the United States launched a military strike in Iran in retaliation for what officials described as threats to America, our personnel, and our interests. Now, the details are varying depending on which news outlet you follow, but the reality is this: people died. Some were soldiers and some were civilians. Families were torn apart. And cities are bracing for more conflict. And across the world, a familiar tension returned, this fear of escalation, of more violence, of war. So I ask you again, and more urgently, what if we could build a society without harm? That question might sound naive or impossible, or maybe it sounds like a luxury in this world that we have shaped by violence. But I want us to hold on to this question anyway and let it take root. Because violence has always been a part of our human story. It lives in our myths and our histories and our institutions. Sometimes it's how power has been claimed or defended. Other times, it's the desperate act of someone who sees no other way. We cannot pretend it doesn't exist or that it will magically vanish. That's not what this is about. But we can stop pretending that it's the only way forward, because it's not. So if you're someone who's also asking this question, even quietly, even tentatively, you are not alone. We're here together. Because here's the thing: harm doesn't always come from bombs or fists. Sometimes it looks like neglect or apathy or putting profit before people. It is silence in the face of suffering. And those small harms that we have control over, those accumulate. They harden us. And it sets the stage, quite frankly, for bigger harm to feel inevitable. So when violence hits close to home or flashes across our headlines, it becomes really easy to normalize it and just numb out so we don't feel the fear. But to say, well, that's just the world that we live in, that's easy. What's not easy is, what if we resisted that pull that normalizes harm? So I want to share something personal here. So after the retreat, I kept coming back to that moment, that boy with the yarmulke and the calm in his voice, the surreal feeling of shock, of realizing that violence had just breached my life. And not in a way that I was physically harmed, but mentally, I will never be the same. Because it reminded me that even the most sacred intentions can be interrupted by trauma. And if it's true in our personal lives, how much more fragile are our public commitments to peace? So when the US strikes a nation like Iran, the story told is often one of strength and deterrence and justice. But beneath those headlines are broken families and traumatized children and adults and communities who are forced to navigate through grief and fear. There is rarely, if ever, a path to peace that begins with bombs. But there are other paths, and we know this. In my work, I have been privileged to walk alongside big-hearted people, some of whom disagree with me about how to build that better world. We don't always share the same strategies or ideologies, But we do share something essential, a belief that care must be at the center, that we need an ethical foundation that is not rooted in winning or domination, but in compassion and responsibility for one another. And this is what is called an ethics of care. And too often, it is dismissed as soft or naive or impractical or weak. But I have learned that being vulnerable, choosing care, and keeping my heart open in the face of harm takes far more courage and strength than acting from fear or anger. Because it's easy to lash out, it's easy to armor up. What's hard is to stay present and to stay open and to keep loving anyway. Because we've also seen what happens when people choose care over cruelty or neglect. When communities organize to support rather than punish, and when leaders act with restraint, with humility, when a child is taught how to process anger without causing pain, these choices ripple outward too. And they ripple out in a healthier way than violence does. So, what if our safety wasn't defined by power and control, but by connection, by mutual care and mutual aid with our neighbors? What if our reflex wasn't retaliation, but restoration? And what would a world without violence even look like? Well, imagine streets where children play freely without fear, where conflict is met with dialogue and curiosity instead of violence and sirens, where justice is based in restitution and restoration, not simply punishment and further dehumanization. So, where communities invest more in mental health and education than in weapons and prisons. That is not the case in the United States today. In every state, we are investing more in prisons, and the federal budget is dominated by the defense budget. What we're shooting for is a society where difference is not a trigger for hate, but a gateway to learning. And it might feel unfamiliar at first, maybe even uncomfortable, because we're all out walking around with these trauma reflexes, braced for impact, numbed out, in survival mode. And we've been taught that this is normal, but it is not inevitable. We have forgotten how to relax into safety. Imagine waking up without dread or moving through your day without scanning for danger, ending the day not just alive, but at peace, with contentment and gratitude for your life. That's the vision that keeps me going. What if we trained ourselves to pause before reacting, giving ourselves that little bit of space, to understand the need beneath the person's outburst? And what if we taught our children that conflict is natural, but violence is not inevitable? I keep imagining a future where instead of asking, how do we win? We ask, how do we heal? Where instead of preparing for the next war, we prepare meals, we grow gardens, we raise children who are less afraid. I know it sounds idealistic, but idealism is just vision coupled with courage. And we need both right now. This is not a call to ignore the dangers in the world. It is a call to meet those dangers with deeper integrity, to resist the false choice between passivity and aggression. There is a third way. It is the way of conscious, grounded response, of principled compassion. And it begins with us. We can interrupt harm in our families, our neighborhoods, our institutions. We could build different systems, practice different responses. It's not about being perfect. God knows I'm not, but it's about being willing. So let's start small. Small. Start now with a question, a pause, a breath. With one brave choice to act from care instead of fear. Because choosing care in a world of harm is not weakness. It is resistance. It is power. And it is the work of a lifetime. I hope you'll join me. Until next time, this is signing out of Terrified Nation.
That's Terrified Nation, a podcast from American Future. If this episode moved you, please help others find it. Leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. For early access to new episodes, become a paid subscriber at terrifiednation.com. Join us next time.